Whispers of a World of Culture. Germany, where forests dream and rivers remember. A sleep story and cultural journey. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine standing at the edge of a dense, ancient forest just as the morning mist begins to lift. The trees are enormous, tall, straight, their trunks rising like the columns of a cathedral into a canopy where pale green light filters down in long, trembling shafts. The ground beneath your feet is soft with decades of fallen leaves, dark and fragrant with the slow chemistry of the forest. Somewhere deep in the trees, a woodpecker begins its rhythmic work against a distant trunk, and somewhere even further, the sound of a small river reaches you, clear and cold, moving quietly over stones that have been here longer than memory. This is Germany. Welcome, quietly and warmly, to one of the great countries of Europe, a land of forests and rivers and wide northern plains, of ancient cities and baroque churches and mountains that hold the sky close against their peaks. Germany sits at the very heart of the European continent, bordered by 9 countries, threaded by the Rhine and the Elbe and the Danube, shaped by the North Sea coast in the north and the Bavarian Alps in the south, and everywhere in between by a landscape of extraordinary variety and quiet, enduring beauty. As we begin this long, slow journey through Germany together, there is no need to hurry. Let the country come to you in layers, the way morning light moves across the German landscape, first touching the high peaks, then filtering down through the forest canopy, then spreading across the river valleys and the plains in a soft, widening warmth. Germany is a country that rewards patience and attention, a country whose depth reveals itself slowly, in the particular quality of a winter afternoon in an old market town, in the sound of bells from a Romanesque church tower, in the smell of bread from a bakery that has been in the same family for 4 generations. The landscape of Germany begins in the north, along the coasts of the North Sea and the Baltic. Here, the world is flat and wide and the sky is enormous, pale and moving, full of light even on days of high cloud, the wind coming in off the water with the smell of salt and distance. The dunes shift along the Frisian coast, and behind them the flat green marshlands stretch away in all directions, cut through with drainage ditches and dotted with the red roofs of farmhouses that crouch low against the weather. The islands off the coast, Cusine, Amrum, rise just above the waterline, windswept and spare and possessing a singular, austere beauty. Moving southward, the land rises gradually into the hills and heathlands of the interior. The Lüneburg Heath is a landscape of extraordinary simplicity, miles of low heather, purple in late summer, stretching away in every direction under a sky that shifts constantly between grey and gold. Small villages of half-timbered houses appear in the folds of the land, their gardens bright with a particular intensity of flowers grown in a northern climate. There is a quality of stillness here, of space and silence, that feels ancient and unhurried. Further south, the landscape begins to gather itself into forests. The great forests of Germany, the Black Forest in the southwest, the Bavarian Forest in the southeast, the Thuringian Forest in the center, the Harz Mountains spreading across the north-central region, are not merely geographical features. They are presences. They have shaped the German imagination for centuries, populated the folk tales and the fairy stories that have traveled from here across the world, provided the timber and the solitude and the sense of mystery that have given German culture some of its most distinctive qualities. To walk into a German forest in the early morning, when the mist still lies between the trees and the light is barely begun, is to understand something about the source of those old, dark, beautiful stories. The Rhine moves through the western part of Germany in one of the great journeys of European geography, entering from Switzerland, broadening as it crosses the plains, then cutting through the spectacular gorge of the Middle Rhine, where medieval castles stand on rocky outcrops above vineyards terraced into steep hillsides, and the river below reflects the sky in long, slow curves. The Rhine has been a road and a boundary and a symbol for thousands of years, and to travel along it slowly, by boat, or by the paths that follow its banks, is to travel through layers of European history as much as through landscape. In the south, Germany rises into the Alps. The Bavarian Alps are the country's southern wall, dramatic, snow-capped, rising suddenly above the gentler foothills and the clear, glacier-fed lakes that lie at their feet. The Zugspitze, Germany's highest mountain, touches nearly 3,000 meters and is visible from far across the Bavarian plateau on clear days. White against a blue sky, its presence felt rather than always seen. The lakes of the Bavarian foothills, the Chiemsee Sea, the Starnberger Sea, the Ammer Sea, are extraordinarily beautiful, their water clear and cold, reflecting the mountains behind them. Germany's climate shifts noticeably from north to south. The north has the oceanic influence, milder winters, cooler summers, plenty of rain and grey days, but also long summer evenings of extraordinary golden light. The south is more continental, colder winters with reliable snow in the mountains, warmer summers with the clarity of alpine air. The Rhine Valley and the region around the Moselle River have their own mild microclimate where wine grapes grow in conditions far further north than might be expected. The four seasons in Germany are genuinely distinct and genuinely experienced. Spring arriving with a relief and a brightness that feels earned after the long northern winter, summer warm and full of outdoor life, autumn the season of harvest and color and the long, beautiful German tradition of the Ernte, and winter settling in with a stillness that has its own profound peace. German national identity is layered and complex and deeply thoughtful, a sense of self that has been examined and questioned and rebuilt with remarkable honesty across the decades of the modern era. To be German is to live with a history that includes some of humanity's greatest achievements in music and philosophy and literature and science, and also events that require ongoing moral attention and remembrance. The German approach to this complexity is one of the country's defining qualities: a seriousness, a Grundlichkeit, a thoroughness of engagement with difficult questions that has produced a culture of unusual intellectual depth. In the quiet rhythm of everyday life, Germany moves to patterns that have been shaped by centuries of careful, craftsmanlike habit. The morning begins early, the bread is taken seriously, the coffee is drunk with attention, the newspaper is read. The working day is conducted with efficiency but not without pleasure. Lunch is a proper meal, not an afterthought, and the evening, when it comes, is given over to family and friendship and the particular German pleasure of the Gemütlichkeit, the warmth and ease of good company in a comfortable place. As we gently move through time in this documentary, we will follow Germany's layered story with care and quiet attention. We will walk through medieval old towns and Baroque palace gardens, through the quiet forests of Thuringia and the vineyards of the Rhine, through Christmas markets glowing with candlelight and summer festivals held in village squares. We will taste the food and hear the music. We will listen to the language in all its careful precision and unexpected warmth, and we will try to understand, softly and without hurry, what it means to be German, to belong to this particular corner of the world and this extraordinary tradition of thought and making. For now, simply rest here at the threshold. Imagine the soft light of a late afternoon in an old German city, the light coming through a gap in the rooftops and falling across the cobblestones in a long, golden rectangle, the bells of the Rathaus clock marking the hour in slow, deep strokes, the smell of fresh bread coming from somewhere nearby, and the sound of voices in conversation, calm and unhurried, drifting from an open window above. The city has been here a long time. It has seen much and it endures. This is Germany, and we have only just begun. History in Germany is not a distant thing. It is woven into the fabric of the present, in the stones of the old cathedral that still stands at the center of the town, in the name of the street, in the particular configuration of the market square, in the commemorative plaque on the wall of a house that tells you, briefly and without drama, that something important happened here. To walk through Germany with attention is to walk through layers of time, layers that overlap and contradict and illuminate one another in ways that are never simple and never finished. Let us begin, as gently as possible, at the earliest reaches of what we know. Long before the Romans arrived at the Rhine, the Germanic tribes inhabited the forests and river valleys of Central Europe. Peoples who spoke related languages, who organized themselves into kinship groups and confederacies, who were skilled farmers and craftspeople and warriors. The Romans encountered them at the Rhine and the Danube, and the encounter was not always peaceful. The Germanic peoples resisted Roman expansion with a determination that ultimately set the eastern boundary of the empire along those river lines, and the great forest beyond remained, in the Roman imagination, a place of darkness and danger and the wild freedom of those who had not been civilized in the Roman sense. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 CE, when the Germanic chieftain Arminius, himself a former Roman officer, ambushed and destroyed 3 Roman legions in the forest of what is now Lower Saxony, fixed that boundary and has remained a touchstone of German historical imagination ever since. The story of Arminius, whatever its subsequent mythologizations, speaks to something real. The sense that the Germanic world was always its own thing, shaped by its own forest-born traditions, not fully contained within any external empire. The great turning of the early medieval period was the coming of Christianity and, with it, the reorganization of the Germanic world into the Frankish Empire of Charlemagne. Charlemagne, Karl der Grosse, Charles the Great, was crowned emperor of the Romans on Christmas Day in the year 800, and from his court at Aachen he governed a realm that stretched from the Pyrenees to the Elbe and created an administrative and cultural order that shaped subsequent European history profoundly. Charlemagne promoted learning, standardized the script of Latin manuscripts, encouraged the building of churches, and established a model of Christian kingship that remained influential for centuries. His palace chapel at Aachen still stands, an octagonal marvel of early medieval architecture, its columns brought from Rome, its mosaic-covered dome reaching upward in a gesture that feels both humble and magnificent. From Charlemagne's empire emerged, after generations of division and succession, what would become known as the Holy Roman Empire, that vast, loose, complex structure of German-speaking territories, city-states, principalities, ecclesiastical domains, and imperial lands that lasted, in various forms, from the 10th century to Napoleon's dissolution of it in 1806. The Holy Roman Empire was famously described as neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire, and yet it provided a framework within which an extraordinary flowering of medieval German culture took place. The great Gothic cathedrals of Cologne and Freiburg and Ulm were built within this framework. The trading cities of the Hanseatic League grew rich and powerful. The imperial cities, Frankfurt, Nuremberg, Augsburg, developed into centers of commerce and art and humanist learning that were among the most sophisticated in Europe. The Reformation began in Germany. On the eve of All Saints' Day in 1517, the Augustinian monk Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses at the castle church in Wittenberg, or so the tradition holds, and set in motion a theological and political earthquake that would reshape the Christian world. Luther's challenge to the authority of Rome, his insistence on the primacy of Scripture and the priesthood of all believers, his translation of the Bible into the German vernacular, a translation of extraordinary literary power that shaped the German language as surely as the King James Bible shaped English, all of this changed everything. The Reformation brought decades of conflict and eventually the catastrophe of the 30 Years' War, which devastated the German lands between 1618 and 1648 and left them depopulated and exhausted. But it also produced a tradition of earnest, individual moral inquiry, a seriousness about questions of conscience and belief, that has remained a characteristic of German intellectual culture ever since. After the long recovery from the 30 Years' War, the German lands entered a period of cultural flowering that produced some of the greatest achievements in the history of Western music and philosophy. Johann Sebastian Bach composed his cantatas and fugues and passions in the churches and courts of Thuringia and Saxony. George Friedrich Handel, born in Halle, carried German musical traditions to London and transformed them into something new. Later, Ludwig van Beethoven and Johannes Brahms and Richard Wagner continued and deepened a musical tradition of extraordinary richness. And in philosophy, the giants of German idealism, Kant in Königsberg, Hegel in Berlin, Schopenhauer and Nietzsche in their solitary intensity, created systems of thought that still shape how the world thinks about itself. The 19th century brought the long-delayed question of German unification to a head. For centuries, the German-speaking world had been divided into dozens of separate states, each with its own court and laws and culture. The movement for unification, driven by romantic nationalism and the practical ambitions of Prussia and its Minister-President Otto von Bismarck, culminated in the proclamation of the German Empire in 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, after the Prussian defeat of France. The new German Empire was the most powerful state in Europe, industrializing rapidly, building a navy, asserting itself on the world stage with a confidence that carried within it the seeds of the catastrophes to come. The First World War and its aftermath, the pain of the Weimar Republic's difficult years, the rise of National Socialism, the Second World War and the Holocaust. These are chapters that Germany has faced with a seriousness and a moral courage that deserves acknowledgement. The process of Erinnerungskultur, a culture of remembrance, that Germany has developed in the post-war decades is unlike anything attempted by any other nation in similar circumstances. The memorials, the school curricula, the legal frameworks, the ongoing public conversations, all of this represents a remarkable collective effort to understand and acknowledge and learn from the worst chapters of a history. It is part of what it means to be German today. The post-war division of Germany into East and West, and the remarkable reunification of 1990 following the peaceful revolution and the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989, are the events that shaped the Germany of the present generation. The wall's opening, on a November evening when crowds gathered at the checkpoints and then the barriers lifted and people began to cross who had been separated for decades, was one of those moments of extraordinary emotion that happen rarely in history. Germany reunified, and the process of growing back together after 40 years of separation continues still, in the quiet work of understanding and integration that is always harder and slower than the drama of the opening moment. Over generations, Germany has built from its complicated and layered history something extraordinary, a country of serious democratic values, deep cultural achievement, and a particular kind of reflective civic consciousness that takes its responsibilities to the world seriously. The history is never finished being worked through. But in that working through, in that refusal to look away, there is something that can only be called moral seriousness, one of Germany's great, perhaps defining, qualities. German is a language that builds. If you listen to it for a moment, really listen, without trying to follow the meaning, just letting the sound of it come to you, you will hear something that has an almost architectural quality. Long, careful constructions that rise from a simple base and add floor after floor of meaning, the whole structure balanced and purposeful, the final word sometimes arriving like the keystone that holds everything together. This is a language that has been used to think some of the most complex thoughts that human minds have produced, and you can hear that history in its sound. German belongs to the West Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family, closely related to Dutch and English and the Scandinavian languages, more distantly related to Latin and the Romance languages. It is spoken as a first language by roughly 100 million people, not only in Germany but in Austria, in Switzerland, in Luxembourg and Liechtenstein, in communities across Europe and the Americas and elsewhere. High German, Hochdeutsch, is the standard literary and administrative form that emerged from the Middle High German of the medieval period and was consolidated, in large part, by Luther's Bible translation in the 16th century. The sound of German is one of its most immediately distinctive qualities. There is the famous Achlaut, the guttural sound at the back of the throat in a word like bark or nacht, and the ich laut, softer and more frontal, in words like ich or mich. There are the vowel sounds modified by the umlaut, the dots above the a, o, and u that shift the sound in ways that take time for other language ears to hear and reproduce. There is the hardness of the consonants in some positions, the softness in others. And underneath all of this, the characteristic rhythm of German speech, the way the stress falls on the first syllable of most words, the way compound words accumulate their stresses, the way a long German sentence moves with a kind of deliberate, measured momentum toward its resolution. The compound word is perhaps German's most famous grammatical feature. German builds words by combining existing words, often in long chains, creating precise labels for concepts that other languages would need entire phrases to express. The word Fingerspitzengefühl, literally, fingertip feeling, means a delicate sense of touch, a feeling for what is appropriate in a situation. Weltschmerz, world pain, is the particular ache of the idealist who finds the world falling short of what it should be. Schadenfreude, harm joy, is the guilty pleasure taken in another's misfortune. Fernweh, far woe, is the longing for distant places, the ache of wanderlust. These words have traveled into other languages because they name things that everyone feels but that other languages had not, until then, named quite so precisely. German has distinct dialects that vary significantly from region to region. Bavarian German sounds quite different from Plattdeutsch, the Low German of the North Coast, which has features closer to Dutch and Old English. The Alemannic dialects of the Southwest, Swabian, Alsatian, have their own music. Saxony German has a distinctive softness. Berlinerisch, the dialect of Berlin, has a directness and an ironic edge that reflects the city's character. These dialects are not merely pronunciation differences, they carry cultural identities, histories, and loyalties. To speak the local dialect is, in many parts of Germany, to signal belonging, to indicate that you are from here, that you know this particular corner of the world from the inside. The way German is spoken, the conversational style, the register, the etiquette, reflects broader cultural values. German communication tends toward directness. When a German colleague says that an idea has problems, they typically mean precisely that, without the softening hedges that other communication cultures might employ. This directness is not unkindness. It is a form of respect, a recognition that the other person can be trusted with the truth. It is also a reflection of a culture that takes accuracy seriously, that believes getting things right matters. And yet German can also be a language of great warmth and humor. The language of close friendship, the shift from the formal Sie to the intimate Du, which is a significant social moment, a recognition of closeness, carries emotional weight. The word Gemütlichkeit, so difficult to translate, means something like comfortable coziness, the warmth of a friendly gathering in a good place. The word Heimat, homeland, home territory, carries a depth of emotional resonance that goes far beyond geography, touching something about belonging and memory and the particular quality of the familiar. German literature is one of the great literary traditions of the world. Goethe's Faust and the poems of Friedrich Hölderlin, the tales of the Brothers Grimm and the novellas of Theodor Storm, the great novels of Thomas Mann and Hermann Hesse, the poetry of Rainer Maria Rilke and Paul Celan, the plays of Bertolt Brecht, these are works that have moved through the world and changed how people think and feel. Rilke's line about beauty being nothing but the beginning of terror, which we are still able to bear, these are words that arrive in German with a weight and a music that translation can only approximate. To hear German spoken among friends, casually, warmly, with the particular energy of people who are comfortable with one another, is to hear the language at its most alive. The rhythm softens, the formal constructions relax, the humor becomes apparent, the words shorten and run together in the way that all spoken languages do when they are at ease. There might be English words mixed in. German absorbs borrowed words with characteristic thoroughness, sometimes changing them into something new, and there will be the regional flavor of wherever these speakers are from, the particular music of their valley or their city. If we listen closely to the language, we can hear something of what it values: precision, seriousness, the patient construction of something that will hold. And we can also hear, beneath the architecture, the warmth that is always there, the particular pleasure of a people who have been thinking very carefully for a very long time, and who still know how to sit down together in a good room and talk through the evening. In many German homes, there is a quality of care that extends to the smallest things: the way a table is set, the way a garden is tended, the way a piece of work is finished. This is not perfectionism in an anxious sense. It is something calmer and deeper, a conviction that doing things properly is a form of respect. Respect for the work, for the materials, for the person who will receive it, for the tradition from which it comes. The German word for this is handwork, handicraft, and it carries connotations of skill and integrity that go well beyond the merely technical. The concept of Gründlichkeit, thoroughness, is perhaps the most fundamental German value. To do something gründlich is to do it completely, to address all the aspects, to leave nothing unfinished. This quality shows up in the workplace, where Germans tend to take preparation seriously and to expect that meetings are for making decisions rather than for exploring possibilities that should have been thought through beforehand. It shows up in education, where depth is valued over breadth. It shows up in the particular German relationship with rules and systems, a respect for the framework that makes thoroughness possible, combined with a capacity to engage seriously with questions about whether the framework is correct. Work ethic in Germany is strong but not unlimited. Germans work hard and take their work seriously, but they also take their rest seriously. The concept of Feierabend, the celebratory end of the working day, the moment when work stops and the evening begins, is taken genuinely, not treated as a formality. Vacation time is taken fully, not apologized for. The law protects workers' rights to rest and to private time with a seriousness that reflects a cultural conviction that life is not only for working. This balance between diligence and rest, between seriousness and enjoyment, is one of the defining rhythms of German life. The German family is, at heart, a stable and central institution, though its forms have changed considerably over generations and vary widely across the country. In many households, there is a strong sense of the family as a unit of both practical support and emotional life, a place where things are discussed seriously, where expectations are clear, where commitment is valued. The Sunday family gathering, with its long meal and its easy, familiar conversation, is a tradition that persists in many forms. Children tend to be given both considerable freedom and considerable responsibility, within a framework of clear expectations. Community life in Germany has strong traditions that run alongside the individualism of modern urban life. The Verein, the voluntary association, the club, is a distinctively German institution. There are Vereine for everything, for choral singing and football and beekeeping and hiking and chess and the preservation of local history. The Verein is where neighbors become friends, where skills are shared, where local identity is maintained. Germany has an extraordinary density of these associations, and their existence reflects a deep cultural conviction that individual life is enriched by voluntary membership in a community of shared interest. The German relationship with nature is a deep one. The tradition of the Wandern, the long walk through the landscape, goes back centuries and is not merely recreational but almost spiritual in its significance. The forests and the mountains and the river valleys are not just places to visit, they are places where something essential happens, a restoration, a reorientation, a return to something that the pressures of daily life can obscure. Environmentalism in Germany has deep cultural roots that preceded the political movements of the late 20th century. The sense that the natural world deserves protection and respect is woven into the German sense of home and belonging. Punctuality is a genuine cultural value, not merely a stereotype. To arrive on time is to respect the other person's time, and time is valued in a culture that believes in the careful use of what one has. This is not an anxious relationship with time but a considered one, the recognition that order and reliability create the conditions in which people can trust one another and work well together. German attitudes toward success are nuanced and sometimes surprising to outside observers. Great wealth, if displayed ostentatiously, tends to attract a degree of social discomfort rather than admiration. The ideal is competence, quality, the excellent execution of one's role, whatever that role may be. The master craftsman is as respected as the university professor. The engineer who builds something beautiful and durable is admired no less than the intellectual who thinks beautiful and durable thoughts. This democratic respect for different kinds of excellence is a genuine and important aspect of German values. Often, you will find in Germany a seriousness about civic responsibility, a sense that democracy is not given but must be actively maintained, that the institutions of the state are important and should be engaged with and held to account. This seriousness has been shaped by history in ways that Germans themselves acknowledge, and it produces a public culture of unusual depth and earnestness, a culture in which it is possible to have a real argument, in public, about genuinely important things. At the heart of daily life, there is a German quality that visitors sometimes take time to understand, a reserved but genuine warmth that reveals itself slowly, in the context of established trust and real acquaintance. Germans tend not to be immediately effusive with strangers, but once a friendship is established it tends to be lasting and sincere and expressed in practical, reliable ways. The person who helps you when you need it, who can be called upon, who follows through on what they say. This is the German ideal of friendship, and it is one of the country's great human strengths. In the quiet of a Romanesque church in the Rhine Valley, the light comes through small rounded windows and falls in soft rectangles across the stone floor. The air is cool and still, carrying the faint smell of candle wax and old stone. The walls are thick, built to last, built to contain something that was meant to endure, and in their thickness there is a feeling of permanence, of shelter, of the weight of centuries bearing down gently on this moment. In this room, people have prayed and sat in silence and sought something larger than themselves for almost 1,000 years. Religion in Germany is a complex and historically significant presence. The Protestant Reformation began here, in the German lands, and it remade not only Christianity but the entire intellectual and cultural landscape of the West. Martin Luther's conviction that the individual's relationship with God was direct and personal, not mediated by institutional hierarchy, not purchased by indulgence, but given freely through faith, was a revolution that went far beyond theology. It shaped how Germans think about authority and individual conscience and the relationship between the inner life and the outer world. Germany today is a religiously diverse country where, since the later decades of the 20th century, the proportion of people with no formal religious affiliation has grown substantially, particularly in the regions that were part of East Germany, where decades of state atheism created lasting patterns of secular life. Among those who do maintain religious identity, the division between Protestant and Catholic broadly reflects the historical geography of the Reformation. The South and West, Bavaria, the Rhineland, remain more strongly Catholic, while the North and East, the regions shaped by Lutheran tradition, are more Protestant. The Catholic tradition in Germany is expressed in a material and ceremonial richness that fills the landscape. The great Baroque churches of Bavaria and the Rhineland, their interiors a golden abundance of gilded altars, painted ceilings, sculpted angels, and flickering candlelight, were built with a deliberate intention to overwhelm the senses, to make the presence of the divine immediate and undeniable through sheer beauty. To enter the Wieskirche in Bavaria on a summer morning, with the white and gold of the interior glowing in the light from tall windows, is to understand what the Baroque was trying to do, to make heaven visible, to make the spirit rise through the eyes. The Lutheran tradition produced a different but equally profound religious aesthetic. The churches are simpler, white walls, clear glass, the emphasis on the spoken and sung word rather than on image and ornament. The music of the Lutheran Church, particularly the chorales of Johann Sebastian Bach, is one of the great religious artistic achievements of any tradition. Bach's cantatas and his Street Matthew Passion were written for specific church services, as acts of devotion as much as artistic expression, and they carry in every measure the conviction that music can carry meaning that words alone cannot hold. The Christmas season in Germany has a spiritual depth that goes alongside its famous material abundance. Advent, the 4 weeks before Christmas, is taken seriously as a time of quiet preparation and anticipation. Advent calendars, Advent wreaths with their candles lit one by one as the weeks pass, the still nacht, silent night, sung in the candlelight of a cold church on Christmas Eve, these are not merely decorative traditions. They carry a genuine quality of longing and hope, of the particular way that darkness and cold and the lengthening of nights can become, if attended to with the right spirit, a preparation for something warm and luminous. Beyond the major Christian traditions, Germany has long had communities of other faiths. Jewish communities were present in the German lands for more than 1,000 years, contributing profoundly to the cultural and intellectual life of the country, before the catastrophe of the National Socialist period. The rebuilding of Jewish cultural and religious life in Germany since 1945 is a quiet, ongoing story of resilience and return. There are now significant Muslim communities, particularly in the larger cities, as well as communities of many other traditions that have arrived with successive waves of immigration. German secular culture also has its own forms of the spiritual, places and practices that serve the human need for transcendence and meaning without necessarily taking a religious form. The concert hall where Beethoven or Brahms is performed is a kind of sacred space. The forest walk on a Sunday morning carries something of the quality of a devotional act. The careful making of something beautiful, a piece of furniture, a garden, a meal, can have a meditative dimension that Germans recognize even without framing it in religious terms. There are superstitions and folk beliefs that persist in the German countryside and in the cultural memory even of people who would not describe themselves as superstitious. The belief in spirits of the forest and the water, the figures who inhabit the old fairy tales, who are neither fully good nor fully bad, who represent the wildness and danger of the natural world beyond the village. These are not beliefs that most people hold consciously, but they have shaped a cultural imagination that still reaches for something beyond the merely rational when confronted with the depth of a forest or the sound of a river at night. If we listen closely to the German spiritual landscape, we hear something that is deeply serious about questions of meaning and conscience and the inner life. A seriousness shaped by Luther's Reformation, by the philosophical tradition from Kant to Hegel to Heidegger, and by the moral reckoning that the 20th century required. This seriousness is not joyless. It exists alongside the Gemütlichkeit, the love of good company and warm rooms and the pleasure of the everyday. But it gives German culture a particular depth and gravity that is one of its most distinctive and admirable qualities. In the soft fabric of tradition, German life has woven together customs that reach back centuries and others that are relatively recent, creating a texture of celebration and ritual that marks the turning of the year with a particular care and intentionality. To follow the German calendar through all its seasons is to follow a story that has been told many times, each time both familiar and new, each celebration carrying within it the memory of all the times it has been celebrated before. The Christmas market, the Weihnachtsmarkt, is perhaps Germany's most famous gift to the world's imagination of winter celebration. These markets, which open in late November and run through the Advent season, transform the old market squares of German cities and towns into places of warmth and light and the particular smell of mulled wine and roasted nuts and gingerbread. The stalls, often made of wood and lit with strings of lights, sell ornaments and handicrafts and traditional foods. Children move through the crowd with wide eyes. The steam from the warm drinks rises in the cold air. The smell of roasting chestnuts drifts across the square. And somewhere, someone is singing a carol, and the old words drift up into the cold, clear night. Easter in Germany carries both its Christian significance and a layer of older spring traditions. The decorating of Easter eggs, Ostereier, is done with extraordinary care and skill in many regions, using techniques of wax-resist dyeing and painting that produce eggs of great delicacy and beauty. The Easter egg tree, peculiar to the German tradition, is a bare branch brought inside and hung with decorated eggs until it becomes a strange, lovely object, half nature and half art. Palm Sunday processions and Good Friday observances and the Easter fire, the Osterfeuer lit on Easter Saturday evening, are all part of the season. The Oktoberfest is the tradition that the world knows best, and it is both more and less than the international imagination of it. In Munich, where it originated in 1810 as a celebration of the marriage of Crown Prince Ludwig, the festival in its original form is a genuinely local thing. The locals have their reserved tables in the enormous tents, their particular Wiesen outfits, their sense of this as an occasion that belongs to them and to their city. The beer is the beer of Munich, the music is the brass band music of Bavaria, and underneath the enormous scale of the event there is a community gathering that has its own warmth and familiarity for those who know it from the inside. German wedding traditions vary by region and have changed considerably over generations, but some elements persist with remarkable continuity. The Polterabend, the evening before the wedding when friends gather to smash crockery at the door of the future couple's home, the noise intended to ward off evil spirits, is still observed in many places. The wedding procession through the village to the church, the exchange of wedding rings on the right hand rather than the left as in the German tradition, the sharing of a first meal together as a married couple, these rituals carry the accumulated meaning of generations of similar moments. The Erntedankfest, the Harvest Thanksgiving Festival, comes in early autumn, a time of churches decorated with fruits and vegetables and grain, of thanksgiving for what the land has given. This tradition connects even urban Germans, whose lives are far from agriculture, to a cycle of natural time that has its own deep rhythm. The seasons are taken seriously in Germany, marked with their appropriate customs and foods and celebrations, and this marking of time creates a quality of continuity and rootedness. Carnival or Fasching in the south and west, Fastnacht in some regions, is the great reversal before Lent, the time when the normal order is suspended and masks are worn and jokes are made and the world turns briefly upside down. In Cologne and Düsseldorf and Mainz, the carnival season is a significant cultural event with elaborate parades and a tradition of political satire that uses humor to say things about power and authority that might otherwise go unsaid. In the villages of Swabia and Baden, the Fastnacht traditions involve elaborately carved wooden masks of fantastic and sometimes alarming creatures, figures that represent the wildness just beyond the edge of the ordered world. The traditions around death and remembrance in Germany are conducted with characteristic seriousness and care. The graves in German cemeteries are typically well maintained, often planted with flowering plants that are tended through the seasons. All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day bring families to the cemeteries to place lights and flowers at the graves of their dead, an act of remembrance that has both its Christian meaning and something older, the sense that the dead remain part of the community, that they are not forgotten but honored. In the kitchen, the traditions of German cooking are maintained with a combination of regional pride and practical pleasure. The baking of bread, Germany's extraordinary bread-making tradition, with its hundreds of regional varieties, is something that many German households still do, or at minimum participate in through the choice of their local bakery. The Christmas baking, the Stahlen and the Lebkuchen and the Springerl and the Zimtstern, is a major undertaking in many homes, a tradition that involves the whole family and that fills the house with the smell of warm spices and vanilla and citrus peel. Over generations, these traditions have been adapted and changed, some falling away and new ones taking their place, while the core impulse remains. The impulse to mark time, to gather together at the turning points of the year, to acknowledge through ritual and celebration the things that matter. The harvest, the darkness, the light returning, the beginning of a marriage, the remembrance of the dead. In this impulse, Germany shares something with all human cultures, while giving it its own particular form, its own particular music. Imagine a bakery on a Tuesday morning in a small German town. The light is still grey outside, the streets not yet fully awake, but inside the bakery it is warm and bright, and the smell is extraordinary, the complex, deep smell of bread that has been slowly fermented and baked at the right temperature, a smell that is nutty and slightly sour and entirely satisfying in a way that goes deeper than the merely sensory. Behind the counter, loaves of rye and mixed grain and sourdough and spelt stand in rows, each one different, each one made according to a recipe that may be decades old, perhaps older. This is one of the great gifts of German food culture, the bread. Germany's bread tradition is extraordinary by any measure. There are more than 300 distinct regional varieties of bread recognized in the country, from the dense, dark pumpernickel of Westphalia, which is baked at low temperature for many hours and emerges with a sticky, intense quality quite unlike any other bread, to the lighter, wheaten Brötchen of the south, the rolls that appear on German breakfast tables every morning with a satisfying crunch when you break them open. The Germans take bread seriously as a food and as a craft, and the quality of an average German bakery is extremely high, the bread made with the patience and skill that good bread requires. The German breakfast, Frühstück, is a proper meal and one of the pleasures of the day. The table is set with rolls and dark bread, with butter and several kinds of cheese and cold meats, with soft-boiled eggs, with jam, with perhaps a small pot of honey. The coffee is good. The time is taken. This is not a rushed meal eaten standing over a counter. It is a civilized beginning to the day, a moment of gathering before the day's work begins. On weekends, the breakfast extends into a long brunch, a leisurely meal that might last well into the late morning. The midday meal, Mittagessen, was traditionally the main meal of the German day, and in many parts of the country and many kinds of households it retains that primacy. A proper Mittagessen might include a soup to begin, perhaps a clear broth with noodles or small dumplings, perhaps a vegetable soup of good depth and simplicity, followed by a main course of meat or fish with potatoes or dumplings or noodles, and a vegetable side, followed perhaps by a simple pudding or a piece of fruit. This is unpretentious, satisfying food, made with care and eaten with the attention it deserves. Potatoes, Kartoffeln, are as central to German food culture as bread. They appear in remarkable variety, as boiled potatoes, as roasted potatoes, as potato salad dressed with vinegar and broth, as Kartoffelnudel, large, tender potato dumplings, as Reibkuchen, the crisp potato pancakes served with apple sauce or sour cream. The potato arrived in Germany relatively late by agricultural standards, but it was adopted with such thoroughness that it is now inseparable from the idea of German home cooking. German meat traditions are varied and regionally specific. The sausage, Wurst, is the most famous, and the variety is genuinely staggering. The long, thin bratwurst of Nuremberg, grilled over beech charcoal. The plump, pale Weisswurst of Munich, made from veal and pork back, eaten before noon according to tradition. The smoky, garlicky Mettwurst of the north. The fine, mild Bockwurst sold from street stands in the cities. The distinctive Frankfurter, thin and lightly smoked, eaten with mustard and bread. Each of these has its place, its occasion, its proper accompaniments, and the knowledge of these distinctions is part of what it means to eat well in Germany. Schnitzel, thin slices of meat, breaded and fried to a crisp, golden brown, appears across Germany in many forms, though the Wiener Schnitzel is technically Austrian. The Schweinsschnitzel, made from pork, is the everyday version, served with a squeeze of lemon and a side of potato salad or boiled potatoes with parsley butter. There is a simplicity and a directness to this food that is characteristically German. The quality is in the execution, the freshness of the ingredients, the correctness of the technique, not in elaboration or complexity. German cake and pastry culture is a world of its own. The Konditorei, the pastry shop, is an institution of considerable social importance. A place where you sit down and drink coffee and eat a slice of something excellent and talk, or read, or simply rest. The Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte, Black Forest cherry cake, is the most internationally famous, but the range is extraordinary. Bienenstick, the bee sting cake of honey and cream. Frankfurter Kranz, a ring cake with buttercream and praline. Apfelstrudel, the apple pastry with its paper-thin dough. The many regional tarts and pastries and layer cakes that each have their own history and their proper season. The beer culture of Germany deserves its own quiet moment of appreciation. The Reinheitsgebot, the purity law of 1516, which specified that beer could be made only from water, hops, and barley, shaped German brewing for centuries and created a tradition of clean, well-made beers of great variety and quality. The different styles, Pilsner, Marzen, Dunkels, Weizen, Bock, Kolsch, Altbier, each have their region, their season, their proper glass, their specific qualities of color and aroma and taste. The Biergarten, where one sits in the open air under chestnut trees and drinks a mass of beer from a ceramic mug and eats a Bresen or a Wurst, is one of the great German social institutions, a place of unpretentious, genuine enjoyment. The German wine regions produce wines of world-class quality that are perhaps less internationally famous than they deserve to be. The Rieslings of the Moselle and the Rhine, with their delicate balance of sweetness and acidity, their floral aromas, their ability to age for decades and become something of extraordinary complexity, these are among the great white wines of the world. The Spätburgunder, Pinot Noir, of Baden and the Ahr produces red wines of elegance and depth. And the wine regions themselves, the steep vineyards above the Moselle, the gentle slopes of the Rheingau, are places of great beauty that repay slow exploration. In the quiet ordering of daily German life, there is an elegance that reveals itself slowly to the attentive observer. The bus arrives when it is scheduled to arrive. The queue forms with a naturalness that suggests not obedience but a shared understanding that order serves everyone. The neighbor greets you with a handshake when you meet for the first time, with a nod and a word on subsequent mornings. None of this is performed. It is simply the texture of a culture that has thought carefully about how people can live together well. The greeting itself is a matter of some ceremony in Germany. A firm handshake, direct eye contact, the clear exchange of names, these are the elements of a first meeting, and they are done with care because they matter. Germans tend to use surnames with the formal SIE address until explicitly invited to use first names and the familiar du, a moment that, as we touched on earlier, carries genuine social significance. This formality in initial interactions is not coldness. It is a form of respect, an acknowledgement that the other person is a distinct individual who has not yet invited you into closer familiarity. Punctuality is not merely a preference in Germany. It is close to a social obligation. To arrive late for a dinner party is to communicate, unintentionally or not, that you do not fully value your host's time and preparation. To arrive late for a business meeting is to signal unreliability. These are strong statements in a culture that takes reliability seriously, and understanding this helps explain what might otherwise seem like an excessive concern with clockwork precision. The flip side of this is that when Germans say they will do something, they tend to do it. The same seriousness that makes lateness awkward makes follow-through reliable. The concept of privacy, Privatheit, is strongly observed in German culture. One does not typically discuss salary in social settings. The details of one's personal life are shared gradually, in the context of established trust, not immediately and not with everyone. Curtains are drawn in the evening not to hide anything but because the interior of one's home is one's own space, appropriately kept separate from the public world. This privacy is not secretiveness but a careful drawing of lines, between the public and the private, between the formal and the intimate, that allows each sphere to function well within its proper domain. Noise, particularly on Sundays and in the evening, is a matter of genuine social regulation in Germany. The Nachtruhe, night quiet, is a recognized social norm, and in many apartment buildings it is also a formal expectation. This is not about controlling people but about protecting everyone's right to rest in their own home. Sundays in Germany are traditionally quiet, the day for rest and family and the walk in the park, not for DIY projects or lawn mowing. This may seem restrictive to outsiders but reflects a genuine cultural conviction that rest is not a luxury but a right, and that the community has an interest in maintaining the conditions for it. The rules of the road are another area where German social norms express themselves clearly. Traffic laws are followed. The right of way is respected. The bicycle lane is precisely the bicycle lane, not a parking space or an extension of the footpath. This is not pedantry. It is the recognition that shared spaces require shared rules, and that the rules only work if everyone follows them. The frustration that Germans feel when others do not follow the rules reflects not a love of rules for their own sake but a genuine sense of fairness, of the social contract broken. Recycling and environmental responsibility have a social dimension in Germany that goes beyond the merely regulatory. The elaborate system of Mülltrennung, waste separation into glass, paper, plastic, organic, and residual waste, is observed with a seriousness that reflects genuine environmental conviction. The Pfand system, whereby bottles and cans carry a deposit that is refunded when they are returned, keeps packaging out of the environment and is accepted as normal and reasonable. These are not behaviors imposed against the will of the population, but ones that express a widely shared sense that the environment deserves protection and that everyone has a responsibility to contribute. Gender roles in Germany have changed significantly across generations, and the country has made substantial progress toward gender equality in public life, though as in all societies the full realization of equality remains an ongoing project. The conversation about how to balance work and family life is active and genuine, and policies such as generous parental leave, available to both parents, reflect a serious social investment in making it possible for both parents to be involved in raising children while also maintaining working lives. Respect for elders in German culture is expressed in practical and consistent ways. Seats are offered on public transport. Forms of address maintain appropriate formality. The knowledge and experience that come with age are generally treated with respect rather than dismissal. In many families, the grandparent generation plays a significant and active role in the life of the family, providing both practical support, the childcare that makes it possible for both parents to work, and the continuity of memory and tradition that connects the generations. At the heart of German social life, There is a deep seriousness about the civic dimension of existence, about what it means to live not only as an individual but as a member of a community, a society, a democratic state. The willingness to pay taxes that support good public services, the engagement with local politics and civic organizations, the reading of serious newspapers and the watching of serious television journalism. These are all expressions of a citizenry that takes its democratic responsibilities seriously and believes that public life matters. In the soft fabric of German dress, there is a story of both practicality and beauty, a recognition that what we wear connects us to our climate, our region, our occasion, and our history. German fashion and dress habits have always been shaped by the country's diversity of landscape and climate, its strong regional identities, and its characteristic combination of seriousness and an appreciation for quality. The traditional dress of Germany's regions, the Tracht, is perhaps best known in its Bavarian form, the Dirndl for women, with its fitted bodice and full skirt and apron, and the lederhosen for men, the leather breeches with their distinctive suspenders. But these are only the most famous of a much wider range of regional traditional dress traditions that extend across the country. The embroidered costumes of the Black Forest, the particular styles of the Frisian coast, the distinctive dress of the Lusatian Sorbs, these represent a patchwork of local identities expressed through fabric and cut and color. The dirndl itself deserves a moment of quiet appreciation. It is, in its finest forms, a garment of considerable elegance, the bodice fitted and carefully constructed, the skirt full and moving beautifully when the wearer moves, the apron adding color and texture, the blouse beneath adding a layer of delicacy. The fabrics, linen, cotton, silk in various weights and weaves, are chosen for their quality and their drape. The traditional embroidery that decorates some examples is extraordinarily fine work, each stitch placed with care. The wearing of a good dirndl at the Oktoberfest or at a traditional celebration is not costuming. It is the wearing of something that has been made with real skill and that connects the wearer to a tradition of real depth. Modern German fashion is pragmatic and quality-conscious. The characteristic German approach to clothing tends to favor durability over fashionability, function over display, good construction over brand visibility. German consumers are generally willing to pay more for something that will last and perform well, and the domestic clothing and textile industries have always had to meet relatively high standards of quality to satisfy this market. The preference for natural fabrics, good wool, solid cotton, durable linen, reflects a sensibility that values authenticity and longevity. The outdoor clothing culture of Germany reflects the love of nature and physical activity. A good waterproof jacket, proper walking boots, a warm fleece for the mountain mornings. These are considered normal investments by a population that walks and hikes and cycles as a matter of daily and weekend life. The functional beauty of well-designed outdoor equipment, the way a good walking boot combines protection and comfort, the way a good rucksack distributes weight, is appreciated in Germany with the same seriousness with which good design in any other area is appreciated. The colors of traditional German regional dress vary considerably by region and occasion. The Bavarian palette tends toward the traditional, blue and white and green, with red as an accent, often on a background of natural linen or cotton. The formal black and white of traditional dress in some northern regions carries a different aesthetic, more austere, more Calvinist in its restraint. The bright embroidery of Sorbian traditional dress uses a vivid palette of red and black and white that carries the visual energy of a folk art tradition of considerable vitality. German professional dress tends toward the conservative and the well-made. The Anzug, the suit, remains the appropriate dress for formal business occasions in many industries and contexts, and the quality of the suit is more important than its fashionability. A good suit, well made from good fabric, worn with a good shirt and tie, is an expression of seriousness and competence, the visual equivalent of Grundlichkeit. In more creative industries and in younger companies, dress codes have relaxed considerably, but the underlying preference for quality and function over ostentation tends to persist. The craft traditions of German textile and clothing production have a long history. The weaving towns of Saxony, the leatherworking traditions of Bavaria, the lace-making traditions of Saxony and Franconia, These represent a heritage of skilled making that shaped regional economies and identities for centuries. Some of these craft traditions survive in modified forms, their products now carrying the additional value of authentic handcraft in an age of mass production. The relationship between clothing and occasion is observed with characteristic German seriousness. There is a proper dress for work and a proper dress for the theatre and a proper dress for the Biergarten and a proper dress for the Wanderung in the mountains. And these distinctions matter not because of snobbery but because of the conviction that respecting an occasion, dressing for it appropriately, is a form of courtesy, a way of acknowledging that the occasion and the other people present deserve your attention and your best effort. Over generations, German dress has evolved with the times while maintaining some of its essential qualities. The preference for good materials, the respect for craft and construction, the recognition that what we wear is a communication as well as a protection. The traditional dress appears at its appropriate celebrations and festivals, not as nostalgia but as living connection to a regional identity that Germans continue to value even in an increasingly globalized world. And in the everyday, the German wardrobe reflects the same qualities that appear in the rest of German life: careful, quality-conscious, practical, and quietly beautiful. If we listen closely to the artistic tradition of Germany, we hear something that is almost overwhelming in its depth and variety. Centuries of music and painting and literature and architecture and philosophy that have shaped not only German culture but the entire cultural inheritance of the modern world. This is not a tradition that holds back or hedges. It goes all the way into the deepest places, seeking the truest expression of what it means to be human, to think and feel and struggle and endure. Music is perhaps Germany's greatest artistic gift to the world. The list of composers born or shaped in the German-speaking world is staggering. Bach and Handel and Telemann in the Baroque, Haydn and Mozart in the classical period, Beethoven standing at the hinge between classical and romantic, Schubert and Schumann and Brahms and Mendelssohn and Liszt and Wagner in the great romantic flowering, Bruckner and Mahler and Richard Strauss carrying the tradition into the early 20th century, Schoenberg and Webern and Berg transforming it in the direction of modernism. This is not one tradition. It is many, each building on and arguing with what came before, each trying to say something true and essential about human experience. Bach above all. Johann Sebastian Bach, who spent most of his working life in the small courts and cities of Thuringia and Saxony, who held positions as organist and Kapellmeister, who wrote vast quantities of music for the immediate practical needs of the churches and courts he served, created a body of work whose intellectual depth and emotional range and formal perfection have never been surpassed. The Goldberg Variations and the Art of Fugue, the Well-Tempered Clavier and the Matthew Passion, the cello suites and the violin partitas. These are works that reveal new depths with every encounter, that seem to contain more than any human mind could have put there, that feel like windows into something that exists outside of time. German literature is a tradition of equivalent depth. The medieval Nibelungenlied and the courtly poetry of Walther von der Vogelweide give way, across the centuries, to the Renaissance humanism of Erasmus and Hans Sachs, the fierce satirical power of Sebastian Brandt, the philosophical poetry of Schiller and the universal genius of Goethe. Goethe's Faust, the play that occupied him for most of his long life and that he completed only in his final years, is perhaps the most ambitious work in the German literary tradition, a work that attempts nothing less than a comprehensive image of human striving and its relationship to what is infinite and transcendent. The Romantic movement in Germany produced not only music but a literature and a philosophy of extraordinary power. The fairy tales collected by the Brothers Grimm, gathered from oral traditions and literary sources across the German lands, gave the world stories that have become universal. Sleeping Beauty and Snow White and Hansel and Gretel and Rumpelstiltskin, stories that speak to the deepest patterns of human psychology in the language of forest and magic and transformation. These are not children's stories in the first instance. They are the distilled wisdom of many generations, shaped into forms that move through the imagination like dreams. German painting and the visual arts have produced movements and individual artists of major significance. The medieval altarpieces and woodcuts of Dürer, whose self-portraits are among the most penetrating images of individual consciousness produced by any European artist before the modern era, give way across the centuries to the romantic landscapes of Caspar David Friedrich. whose paintings of solitary figures contemplating vast landscapes of mist and mountains and moonlit seas have become images of a particular kind of interior experience, of the individual confronting the sublime. The expressionist movement of the early 20th century, Die Bruck and Der Blaue Reiter, produced paintings of electric emotional intensity. Kirchner and Nold, Kandinsky and Franz Marc's horses in colors that were never about horses but always about something else, something larger. German architecture has produced buildings of extraordinary beauty and significance across every period. The Romanesque churches of the Rhine and the Cologne Cathedral, the half-timbered town halls of the medieval cities, the Baroque palaces of the southern princes, the neoclassical grandeur of Schinkel's Berlin, the revolutionary modernism of the Bauhaus school, founded in Weimar in 1919 and moved to Dessau, then Berlin, which changed architecture and design and the relationship between art and industry for the entire world. The Bauhaus conviction that good design should be available to everyone, that the beautiful and the functional should not be separate, that art should engage with the conditions of modern life rather than retreat from them, these ideas remain live and influential to this day. German cinema has produced some of the most significant films in the history of the medium. The expressionist films of the Weimar era, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, Nosferatu, Metropolis, explored the shadows and anxieties of a society under enormous pressure with visual inventiveness and emotional depth that have never been entirely surpassed. The new German cinema of the 1970s and 1980s, Fassbinder and Herzog and Wendius, produced work of international significance that engaged with German history and identity with unflinching seriousness. And more recently, films like Das Leben der Anderen, The Lives of Others, have explored the recent German past with a compassion and an intelligence that speak to the culture's ongoing determination to understand itself. The German theatre tradition is one of the richest in the world. Brecht's theories of epic theatre, developed in the 20th century, changed how theatre all over the world thinks about its own conventions and its relationship to the audience. The German Stadttheater system, a network of publicly funded theatres in every major city, offering productions of opera and drama and dance throughout the season, is a model of cultural provision that reflects the conviction that art is not a luxury but a civic necessity, something that every community deserves access to. Over generations, this extraordinary flowering of artistic creativity has continued to regenerate itself, taking new forms while drawing on deep roots. The music festivals that fill the German summer, the literary festivals and book fairs, the art exhibitions and museum openings, all of these are expressions of a culture that believes deeply in the importance of the inner life and in art as its most adequate expression. In the quiet of a concert hall where the last note of a Schubert string quartet has just faded into silence, or in the hush before the curtain rises in a Bavarian theatre, or in the stillness of a museum room where a Friedrich landscape hangs at just the right height for the eyes to take it in all of these moments, something essential about Germany is present. In the quiet ordering of German public life, there is a particular quality of care, a sense that the systems by which people live together have been thought through and built to serve real human needs. This is not a perfect or complete achievement. It is an ongoing project, and Germans themselves are among its most rigorous critics. But there is a seriousness in the German approach to social organization that produces public institutions of genuine quality and a civic life of real depth. The Federal Republic of Germany is a parliamentary democracy with a federal structure that divides governmental power between the national government and the 16 Länder, states, of which it is composed. This federalism is not merely administrative, it reflects a genuine political philosophy, a belief that power distributed among multiple levels of government is less prone to the concentration that history has shown to be dangerous. The Grundgesetz, the basic law, Germany's constitution, was written in 1949 with a careful awareness of the ways in which constitutional structures can be subverted, and it includes provisions designed to make such subversion more difficult. The protection of human dignity in the Grundgesetz's first article, Die Würde des Menschen ist unantastbar, human dignity is inviolable, is not rhetoric but a genuine constitutional principle with legal force. The German parliament, the Bundestag, is elected through a mixed system of constituency seats and party list proportional representation, a system designed to combine local representation with a fair reflection of the overall distribution of votes. The Bundesrat, the upper house, represents the interests of the Länder in federal legislation. This balance of powers, between federal and state governments, between executive and legislative branches, between elected officials and independent courts, reflects a constitutional design that takes seriously the lessons of what can happen when those balances fail. The education system in Germany is primarily organized at the Länder level, which means there is considerable variation from state to state. The general structure, however, involves primary schooling followed by a division into different types of secondary school, the academic gymnasium, which leads to the Abitur and university, the Realschule and the Hauptschule, which lead to vocational training, and the Gesamtschule, which combines these tracks. This dual system of academic and vocational education is one of Germany's most important and successful social institutions. The vocational training that leads to apprenticeships in skilled trades, technical occupations, and commercial roles produces a workforce of high skill and genuine competence that is the foundation of Germany's economic strength. The German university system has a long and distinguished history. The research university as a modern institution was largely invented in Germany, at the University of Berlin, founded by Wilhelm von Humboldt in 1810. The Humboldtian ideal of the unity of teaching and research, of the university as a place not only of transmission but of original inquiry, shaped universities across the world. German universities have traditionally been tuition-free or very low cost, reflecting the conviction that higher education is a public good that should be accessible regardless of financial background. The German economy is the largest in Europe and one of the most significant in the world, a market economy with a strong social dimension, organized along the principles of what German economists call the soziale Marktwirtschaft, the social market economy. This concept, developed in the post-war period, holds that a market economy can and should be organized in ways that serve social as well as economic goals, that prosperity is not an end in itself but should be organized to produce broad well-being, decent working conditions, social security, and environmental sustainability. This is not state socialism. It is a market economy disciplined by social purpose. The German welfare state, Sozialstaat, provides a comprehensive system of social insurance covering healthcare, unemployment, retirement, and long-term care. These systems are funded through contributions from employers and employees and represent one of the most extensive social safety nets in the world. The philosophical foundation is solidaristic, the recognition that misfortune can befall anyone, and that the risk of illness or unemployment or old age is best borne collectively rather than individually. This is a foundational German social conviction, and the maintenance and reform of these systems is a constant and serious subject of democratic deliberation. Healthcare in Germany is provided through a system of statutory health insurance, Gesetzliche Krankenversicherung, which covers the vast majority of the population, supplemented by private insurance for those who choose or qualify for it. The standard of care is high, the access is broadly equitable, and the system is subject to ongoing reform and debate as demographic change and technological development raise new questions about sustainability and fairness. Environmental law and environmental protection are areas where Germany has led by example in important ways. The Energiewende, the energy transition, the systematic shift toward renewable energy, is one of the most ambitious national energy policies in the world, driven by the conviction that the long-term costs of climate change are greater than the short-term costs of transition. The phase-out of nuclear power, the investment in wind and solar energy, the feed-in tariff system that encouraged distributed renewable generation, these are significant policy choices that reflect a genuine cultural commitment to environmental responsibility. The rule of law in Germany, Rechtsstaat, is taken with profound seriousness. The independence of the judiciary, the accountability of public officials, the procedural regularity of administrative action, these are not bureaucratic formalities but the substance of a democratic system that has learned from its own history what happens when law is corrupted or suspended. The Constitutional Court, the Bundesverfassungsgericht, is one of the most respected judicial institutions in the world, and its decisions are accepted and implemented by the political system with a regularity that reflects genuine democratic maturity. As night settles over the German landscape, something becomes quiet and clear that was harder to see in the busyness of the day. The last light lingers long in the northern summer evenings, gilding the tops of the forest trees and turning the surface of the lakes to old copper and gold. The cathedral bells in the market town begin their slow evening count. Somewhere in the distance, a train passes, that characteristic sound of the German railway, steady and reliable, carrying people home from wherever they have been. And in the houses and apartments of the cities and the villages, the lights come on one by one, warm against the gathering dusk. What is the soul of Germany? It is a question that Germans themselves ask with unusual frequency and unusual seriousness, because this is a culture that believes in asking serious questions, and because the question of identity here carries a particular weight. Germany is a country that has been at the center of some of the most significant and some of the most terrible events in modern history, and that has responded to this position not with simplification or evasion but with sustained, difficult, ongoing engagement. The soul of Germany is in its forests. There is something about the great German forests, the darkness and the depth of them, the way the light comes through in shafts between the tall trunks, the silence that fills them on a winter morning when the snow has freshly fallen, that speaks to the deepest layer of the German cultural imagination. The forests were always there, before the cities and the roads and the history, and in some sense they remain the ground from which everything else grows. The German love of the Wanderung, the long walk through the natural world, is an expression of this, a recurring return to something that restores. The soul of Germany is in its music. The tradition of musical creation and musical listening that runs from Bach and Handel through Beethoven and Brahms to the contemporary composers who continue to work in Germany's concert halls and universities is one of the great contributions of any culture to the common human inheritance. To sit in a German concert hall and hear a great orchestra play a great symphony is to be in the presence of something that the German cultural tradition has given the world, a way of organizing sound that carries meaning and emotion far beyond what words alone can convey. The soul of Germany is in its seriousness. Not the seriousness that refuses to laugh. Germans laugh, with real pleasure, and German humor has its own distinctive qualities, its own particular forms of irony and absurdity and wordplay, but the seriousness that believes things matter. That ideas have consequences. That history is not just the past but the ground we stand on and the ground we are responsible for. That craft and quality and thoroughness are not optional extras but the proper way of doing anything worth doing. The soul of Germany is in its communities. The villages that have maintained their character across centuries, the small cities where the medieval church tower still marks the center of things, the neighborhoods of the great cities where people know their baker and their butcher and their neighbor across the stairwell. The Verein system that turns shared interests into occasions for meeting. The traditions of the table and the beer garden and the Christmas market that make occasions for people to gather and to be, for a while, simply together. The soul of Germany is in its contradictions. This is a country that produced Goethe and Hitler, Bach and the Holocaust, the most rigorous legal system in Europe and the most systematic violation of law in modern history. These contradictions have not been resolved. They are held, with difficulty and seriousness, in a national consciousness that refuses to resolve them into simple lessons. The capacity to hold contradiction without flinching from it, to look at the full truth of a complicated history rather than selecting only the parts that are comfortable, this is itself a form of moral courage. The soul of Germany is in its ordinariness. In the bakery on Tuesday morning, in the bicycle commuter on the bridge, in the grandmother tending her garden on a Saturday afternoon, in the children playing in the schoolyard after the bell, in the workers eating lunch in the break room of a factory in a small Bavarian town. Life, lived day by day with the characteristic German combination of diligence and care and the capacity for quiet, uncomplicated pleasure. This is where the soul of the country really lives, not in the grand monuments and the famous names but in the irreducibly particular lives of the people who call this place home. Winter, when the snow holds everything in a stillness that feels almost absolute. As we gently move toward the end of this long, slow journey through Germany together, it seems right to sit quietly for a moment with what we have found. We have moved through the forests and the cities, through the history and the music, through the language and the traditions and the values that give German life its particular texture. We have heard the bells and the bread smells and the sound of the river. We have tried to understand something real about a complex and extraordinary culture without simplifying it or reducing it to what is merely convenient. Germany is a country in motion, always engaged with its past, always arguing with itself about its future, always building and rebuilding and questioning what it has built. This motion is not restlessness, it is the sign of a living culture, one that takes its responsibilities seriously enough to keep asking the hard questions rather than settling for comfortable answers. There is something profoundly human about this, the refusal to be finished, the insistence on continuing to work, to think, to build, to remember, to hope. Over generations, Germany has given the world some of its greatest music and its most searching philosophy and some of its most beautiful buildings and the deepest lessons about what can go wrong when a civilization loses its moral bearings. All of this is still present, in the thick walls of the old cathedral and the clean lines of the Bauhaus building and the notes of the cello suite and the words carved in stone at the memorial. It is all still here, part of what this country is and what it continues to become. As the night deepens over the German landscape, over the snow-dusted peaks of the Bavarian Alps and the wide flat northern plain and the winding Rhine in its gorge and the dark, sleeping forests of Thuringia, the spirit of Germany continues to breathe quietly through its people, its stories, its long and complicated and always searching traditions. The bread is rising in the bakery for the morning. The choir has finished its rehearsal and the singers are putting on their coats and saying their good nights. The lights in the houses are going out one by one, as people settle toward sleep, toward the rest that the day requires and deserves. Rest now. Let the sounds of Germany grow quieter around you, the bells, the forest, the river, the soft voices in conversation, the last note of the string quartet fading in the concert hall. Let the images soften and slow, the candlelight in the Christmas market, the mist in the morning forest, the long summer light over the vineyard, the snow on the cobblestones of the old town at night. Germany is at rest, and you may rest with it. The forests dream. The rivers remember. And the spirit of this extraordinary, serious, musical, searching, and profoundly human country rests in the darkness, ready for whatever the morning brings. Gute Nacht. Thanks for watching. What culture would you like to learn about next? Comment below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. See you on the next one.